Hi, and welcome to this episode of Beyond the Ballot. This episode will be about environmental activism, and today we have Zanna and Samer with us. Zanna, would you like to introduce yourself?
I want to say thanks for inviting me. This is Zanna speaking from all the way from Brussels. So it's quite a stretch in terms of us being apart, but here we are, Zoom, podcasts, all of these things that are possible. So I'm an activist from Belgium. I also work for Greenpeace. That's my daytime job. And I've been volunteering with multiple environmental kind of citizen movements over the past years. And I'm really excited to meet Sam and the two of you and have a conversation about activism, environmental activism. So needed.
Thank you for being with us, Zanna. Samer?
Hey, so I'm Samer. I'm from Lebanon. I'm an activist there. I also work in waste management in my day, and as well as I have volunteered in many environmental projects such as reforestation, cleanups, and other movements that are based here in Lebanon. I'm excited to talk more about this as we go through. So thank you again for having us.
I feel like asking you about all your initiatives and campaigns would be a very broad question, but perhaps it would be good to start tackling this question by talking about the gaps that your campaigns seek to fill. Because especially knowing the work that Samer usually does, and on a local level, all the gaps that we have, there is a lot of these that Samer's campaigns have been focusing on. And also after the conversation that I had with you, Zanna, I got to expand my knowledge a bit about all the campaigns that you have in Belgium, and that there are a lot of similarities, well, at least a few, in the challenges that we face in both countries. So perhaps, Samer, would you like to tell us a bit about the gaps that we have been facing in Lebanon and how your campaigns have worked on mending these gaps?
First off, to start with, if we want to look at the situation in Lebanon, we are facing a lot of problems and challenges on a daily basis, whether they're economy or personal problems and so on. So the usually the subject of the environment is not only boring, but it's not even considered in our society and especially in our government. So this is one huge gap. Whenever we want to tackle an environmental issue, most of the people answer us, it's not the right time now. We have other problems to look at. But the thing is, we have a lot of problems and we don't look at any. But let's not talk about the negativity only. Our campaigns in Lebanon were very successful because they were somehow a united campaign with other entities, other activists in Lebanon. One of the major campaigns or one of the major fights that we won against the government was the Bisri campaign, the Valley of Bisri. And basically, in few words, the government wanted to build a dam there to provide water for the city of Beirut. Whereas we already have 45 to 50% deficiency in the water system in Beirut itself. So if this is fixed, we don't need dams. But unfortunately, businessmen and contractors were somehow related to politicians, and they wanted to build this dam and make a lot of money out of it, not only in cash, but also in natural resources, as in soil, relics, and so on. So we conducted this massive campaign, and it started in 2015, but it grew bigger after the Lebanese revolution in 2019. And this campaign went international. The whole diaspora joined on it. We conducted simultaneous protests at the World Bank because they were the main funders to this project. And we actually won after a few years. The funding is halted now. It's not completely stopped. So they can always create something and divert the fund to another project. But I think for now, we're good and we saved this area, or what what is left from that area.
First of all, this dam was supposed to provide water for the city of Beirut, but only fixing our infrastructure, which is in a very dire condition, would already provide 50% as per what Samer was already saying. So instead of building more dams, we could have utilized that same budget to fix our infrastructure, which would fix the water problem equally to so many different areas in Beirut.
Like the water that falls into this dam is already polluted. It comes from the Lake Araun. So basically, this whole project was only made to steal money and natural resources.
And there were already so many similar failed projects, which also Samer can add on. Like, for example, we know that the dam in Ballot has completely failed because it was built without the proper assessment to show that the nature of the land could not withstand the building of a dam. So basically, that land is so shaky, it's so unstable that they have been adding
Concrete, yes.
Concrete. I'm not sure I remember this correctly, but basically they added concrete support for the dam because the lands were so shaky that they ended up utilizing so much more than the budget that was initially put for the dam for a project that eventually only failed. However, it doesn't matter to them the damage that they have already inflicted upon the nature there, because they have made so much profit off of these projects that it doesn't matter if the project failed. They've already made their profits. So at this point, it is one failed project.
That's
we have
true.
moved on, and they have been trying to build different dams in different areas without the proper assessment for them. And the Bisri Dam was going to be one of these, except this one was actually stopped due to the collective effort of what started as a few activists raising awareness on these dams and how destructive they are to the nature around them. And then eventually it was the whole country that was opposing the ruling class and the way that they wanted to build that dam. We also have other dams like Samer, the one يلي بالبترون بالشمال قبل
Yes.
طرابلس. مسايلحة.
Exactly.
Like the Msailha Dam has completely destroyed its surrounding areas. It is now just completely dry and it doesn't even work, except it has
It's
been
always
completely
dry.
destructive.
We can also see what happened after the construction of Qaroun Lake, like with the whole Litani River drying out, and then like the fish, the amount of pollution in it, like it's horrible from the soil to the water supply.
I mean, the story you're telling, and we already discussed this in our prep talk, is really kind of, I mean, it's really outrageous in so many ways to listen to. But what was the big change with this story? What was that made all these people collectively oppose this project? While, you know, if you had more of these projects before, you might have more of these projects after. What was the thing that really changed in the people's mind, that you changed in the people's mind?
I wouldn't say that I have changed, but because this fight started in 2015, and honestly, I didn't even know about the area. I didn't know that this area existed in Lebanon. So in 2019, a revolution happened in Lebanon, and literally everyone got involved in that. Even the Lebanese diaspora was heavily involved in that. And so I was introduced to Bisri after a month after the revolution happened. And probably what made this fight even bigger is this whole hype around the revolution, hype against being against the government, against all of these contractors, destroying our land, stealing our resources. And that's why people joined in on this. Actually, a lot of people were camping there until the fight, the project was stopped.
How was it
So
stopped?
it's not,
Can we talk about that?
basically, when you have a fund, when you receive funds from the World Bank to a certain project, there's always a deadline to deliver things. What they were usually doing here, they use contractors that are related to politicians, and like buy from them, say bulldozers or heavy machineries, or like just build these houses, the construction houses, as offices, and just send pictures to the World Bank saying, yeah, we started the work, inject us with more funds, like let's go cut some trees and yellow, let's get more funds for that. But then the project was stopped because a lot of people were camping there, a lot of people from the local community, a lot of activists, and basically Lebanese from all around. But I remember like the last day we camped there was on August 2 days before the blast. And the project was stopped after 1 month after the blast in September. So I think this was also, other than the camping and other than the protests against this whole project, this was also the cherry on top. We're not just going to inject $600 million to fund a dam while the whole capital is blown away.
The benefit that this project got was that of having so much attention and awareness raised on it, because with the onset of the revolution had something that was very beautiful about it that was a bit unwitnessed before, which is that everyone really came together. It was before people started being divided and starting to exempt certain people from the ruling class from who they were revolting against. So when the revolution started, it was under the title or the slogan of Killon yani Killon, which means everybody means everybody. There is no exception to this revolution. Everyone is corrupt, and we are revolting against the entire ruling class. A few days later, you started having some people realizing that, they don't want to revolt against their specific leader. They just want to revolt against everybody else. And then weeks and months later, people started chattering a bit. And I think they lost sight of the thing that first brought them together. Yeah. But this campaign really has started having more attention on it with the onset of the revolution. And this was where the activists got a bit lucky, because usually environmental campaigns do not have enough attention or the attention that they deserve being shed on them, mostly because Lebanese people have these weird expressions that they always say, like, we have so many problems, we really can't take more problems on top of that. Like, we'd rather focus on our livelihoods, on, we seriously have so many problems that focusing on environmental campaigns specifically feels a bit intangible. But then with the onset of the revolution, we had, there were wildfires, which everybody was scared of. They literally ravaged the country. They were across the country, north to south. And so everybody felt that they were brought together by an environmental cause, which they would otherwise not really give much attention to. So shortly after that, there was also the campaign for the Bisri Dam. And then everybody just felt like they were brought together by their common hatred and revolution against the ruling class, which took no action against the wildfires. And now this was happening. So everybody was really brought together in Lebanon and in the diaspora in this campaign. And then there was also the advantage of the deadline with the World Bank that we're approaching. And so all of these factors really came together for a succeeding campaign. Samer, you wanted to add something?
Yes, sure. There's also one major factor that, other than the hype of the revolution and this, like the fight started in 2015, whereas environmentalists have proposed a lot of other alternatives that doesn't necessarily need $600 million, that will actually create more jobs and more like lean towards a circular economy to sustain these areas where the dam would have been built. So again, like they were key people in this fight that helped this dam from being done.
This is such an interesting introductory piece into campaigning and what is like successful campaigning, and especially the way that you describe how all these pieces of the puzzle came together, had different unusual type of suspects getting involved, an environmental sort of disaster looming, but also that combined with people finding motivation in opposing the systems and the powers that are. That's so interesting. And especially for me, since I live in a country where people accept government, right? Mostly people accept governmental authority. Most people do have a lot of confidence still in government, unless when it comes to vaccinations and stuff. That's a whole other debate. Very, very important as well. But we at Greenpeace, what we try to do is we try to, of course, just like you, try and fight environmental disasters, try and speak for or work together with minorities who need help in exposing environmental issues. But what we are really trying to do is change the system and to say, there's a big corporate elite, there's a government that isn't always representing our interests and that is not doing the necessary in terms of climate ambition. And I think we have a hard time telling that part of the story and getting people to be motivated by the fact that we need system change politically, economically, etc. And that's what I find so interesting in your project, because or in this particular campaign, because that's where it all came together, of course, after many years of hard work and using so many different tactics. But the fact that people got in because they got angry and they were like, these politicians and these corporate elites, in the same bed, making up these projects that serve no one, that in itself is such a powerful campaign narrative. If you get people to buy that, then you're way beyond fighting for preserving a piece of nature or getting people to oppose a project. You're talking about people getting behind a new idea of what the system should look like. And that's really, really powerful.
It's actually, it's very important that Zanna, you mentioned that. And I think the way to make people more motivated into joining these kind of movements or just fights is just to give them a sense of ownership, or just raise awareness on that these natural resources are basically yours and everyone's. It's not like a product for it to be stolen and then created somehow and then they sell it and make money out of it. So it's good that you mentioned that.
But it's really interesting also that to get people to see, that, these are your natural resources. This is your nature. This is your piece of land, right? And then to get people to find the motivation, be like, yes, it is, that's why I'm going to go and step up and
Absolutely.
fight. And that in itself is
and I think it's because we're also going through an economical crisis, that people are now more aware about their resources. They're not, like, they can get free energy from the sun, for say, or they can, how it is.
But there has been more light shed on this since the onset of the crisis, with now people who can afford solar panels finally getting them, as opposed to before where they would just rely on the generators and the government provided electricity.
Unfortunately, the most vulnerable always gets affected.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because I can imagine it's a certain type of people with a certain disposable income that can indeed say, like, okay, we're going we're gonna provide for ourselves, we're gonna install self-sufficient system and put all the solar panels up while that's
exactly.
That's actually something that we discussed in in one of our sessions. It's in climate activism, that the solutions that are provided as climate action and as mitigation of the climate change, they're so far it relates to the economic and the financial abilities of each individual, of the country, of the political aspect of it. Even when you want to enforce, let's say, the use of renewable electricity, let's say, for the solar panels, you can enforce the policies. So it's all intertwined. One can't really say that they don't want to go for renewable energy because it's just that it's not convenient for me, let's say. But lately, it's just like Mustafa has been saying, people have been trying to look for different ways to manage their basic needs. And many people in the villages, even, they're trying to go to how people used to live way before. And that's very interesting. It's like we came to a full circle. Like we created so many technological things, and then whoops, we did something wrong, and we're back to point zero.
I think whatever you guys are saying is very valid, but also I believe that the solutions to our problems will come from nature and the environment. For instance, now let's talk about Lebanon. We have a crisis in water, we have a crisis in energy, we have power cuts and all of that. What will be the solution? Fossil fuel is very bad, and now we're facing a climate change, and we're actually experiencing climate change, and this whole like threat of climate on the environment, this threat of climate on agriculture, on water, on air pollution, and this whole umbrella falls under the usage of fossil fuels. So, and plus it's highly expensive and so on. So in the case of Lebanon, now we're a country that's broke, and we're a country that actually have 300 days of sun per year, whether it's in winter or in summer. And yet, until this day, we don't have like a solar farm, or even we have a lot of valleys, we have a lot of wind, we have also water, so we can benefit from these resources to create and generate power. And this is a problem that the solution came from the environment. So this is what I meant with all our problems that we're facing today as a human species. The solution will come from the environment.
On that, exactly. So many things, many people, many times when I spoke about this, like I know that it would make sense to have solar farms and wind farms. It's just that most of the people that know enough about solar and wind power, they would say that like within the Beqa region, let's say, because this is the most sun and the most wind that we get, it wouldn't be enough. So I would like to reply for that. Yeah,
that's true. And maybe now you can't like just switch from fossil fuels and divert or convert to renewable energy, but you can start introducing this. And I'm not for the case of Lebanon, it doesn't have to only be based on the solar energy. It could be, it can come from the sea, like tidal energy. Maybe this is not very efficient now, but it can be worked on. And you have the wind power. So there are a lot of, you can also create or generate power from food. And 60 to 70% of our general waste is organic waste. So why not turn this into biogas or whatever? Why put it in landfills? So there are a lot of solutions, and again, they all come from the environment.
And yeah, this was an idea that was previously mentioned by a speaker that we've had on a previous episode. He said, we have all the resources in Lebanon and we don't have the infrastructure, which is the perfect setting to set up a new infrastructure. Like right now to us, there is nothing that needs to be rebuilt in order to go in a more sustainable manner with the way that we provide our energy.
It sounds so evident then, you know, like this renewable transition is there to grasp. Of course, it's about building infrastructure and reorganizing the financial resources towards those sectors. But what are then the biggest barriers? Like, why isn't this happening? Because
businessmen and politicians being in bed together. But I'll leave that to Samer to answer.
We always go back to this Valley of Bisri, the dam project, because it's like a model of all their projects that they go through and how they like brew them and just go with them and make money out of them. So basically what they do is contractors or business people come and propose this project to politicians, but at the same time they are related either with family ties or like work ties, and they just go for it, you know. And Lebanon is such a small country where everyone literally, I don't know, is either a cousin or people just know each other, and that's how things work. Like, yeah, it's funny enough, and this is a main barrier because the people that for instance, own quarries are maybe not inside the parliament, but they're related, or they have someone inside the parliament. So, and it goes the same for the fuel problem. For 15 or 16 years, maybe more than that actually, the Électricité du Liban, the institution, was handled by one political party, and it has like billions of dollars in deficiency. And now we don't even run on like the state generators. It's private generators. And so imagine we pay 2 and 3 times an electricity bill for an electricity that's not even 24 hours available. So what's happening now, it's people from higher classes buying solar panels, as you were saying earlier, and they're just installing them on their roofs. So there's no national plan. It's, again, a self plan. And this is very bad for a community. And only the vulnerable will get mostly affected with these problems, whether they are power or water or even food and so on.
And EDL is behind over 50% of our national debt. And the two bills are actually, well, one of them has now adopts the black market rate of the dollar. So basically what we pay in electricity bills, we pay 20 times that in generator bills. So if my usual electricity bill would be worth the equivalent of what used to be $33 before the crisis, I also pay about $1,000 in private generators in order to get about 13 hours out of 24 of electricity per day.
To go back to what we were saying, the main barrier or the main challenge that we're facing is mostly that politicians and capitalists or people with money making more money out of this, like out of fossil fuels or out of this type or this plan of distribution of electricity. Because if you go and like see who are the generator owners, they are also people that are politically affiliated to this class or this regime or this ruling train. So the fight here is against every single institution, against every single politician, against mainly the crony capitalists.
I think what you described very well, which is also the biggest, and this comes back to your story about how you stopped the dam, is this linking a project or an environmental disaster with showing the system behind it that's upholding the business as usual. And I think this always reminds me of a quote from Game of Thrones, from Daenerys Targaryen. It's at the very end of I had to sit through all these seasons to remember this one quote, but she says at some point, the world we need will not be built by the men who are loyal to the world we have. And I think this captures really perfectly. I show this in all the presentations that I do. This captures so perfectly the sort of the stakes, right? And whether it's in your country, fossil fuel projects being pushed through, regardless of the sort of the rationale behind them, or regardless of whether these are actually needed, or a system in Belgium where you have politicians from a particular extreme right-wing party saying, we have to stick to nuclear, while we've decided years and years ago that we would exit and phase out nuclear energy. But the problem is that, of course, you're in a situation that these politicians for years have been opposing a phase out, so not doing anything about thinking what the transition should look like, building renewable energy infrastructure. And in a sense, I think our stories are somehow connected in that. And now, yelling from the top of their lungs, if we don't get more, if we get out of nuclear, we will either run out of energy, or the prices, which have been going up a lot. I don't know this, well, you've talked about story about private generators, but here in Belgium and in Europe, gas prices have been going through the roofs, affecting most people's energy bills, paying 2-3 times as much as we would usually do. Oh God, well, I mean, the reason why gas has gone up so much, it's a very complex problem, and it hasn't anything to do with Belgium in particular, but it's very much also about the geopolitical war between Russia, a lot of our gas comes from Russia, comes from Ukraine, right? And we of course, Belgium produces, we have nuclear energy, we have a bit of wind, etc. But yeah, gas prices have just been consistently going up. At some point, I think they were up to 300%. So basically, to give you an example, my friend yesterday, he lives in a house with 5 people. They have an energy bill that's 500 a month, and now they're supposed to pay 1,200 euros a month. So that's, that instead of every person paying about 100 euros just for the cost of electricity and gas, they live in quite a big old house. They would pay 2 times as much. So if you're a student, even if you're a person with a normal salary, but this person in particular lives with a couple of people that are looking for a job, this is huge. And this affects not only people in lower wage categories, this is now also affecting people in middle wage categories. And this just comes to show, and I'm not saying that if we would have much more renewable energy infrastructure in place, I think part of the problem would be solved, because we wouldn't have to rely on gas as much. People wouldn't have to, they could rely on either their own solar panels or on other systems but it just shows that this whole fossil fuel energy system is just a geopolitical mess. And if one party decides, whether it's your governments or your corporate elites, or Russia, to shut down, then we all have a problem. And it's so incredibly unreliable. It's just insane that we are still stuck in the system. So, and that then coming back to what Samir said, is that exactly the solutions have to come from our own resources, which is wind, which is solar, which is renewable and sustainable sources of energy. And it's insane that it drives me nuts that it's 2022 and we're in this situation where we're still debating how to do this and where to go, while at least in the country where I live, we have the technology, we have the access, it's a matter of political commitment, right? Getting out of the status quo and saying, no, this is now, and going for a new, leaving behind the business as usual, literally, and the businessman as usual as well.
That's exactly the point that I wanted to say, that it's not just that it's not available for most of the people, for most of the people in Lebanon, but actually it's the whole election thing, the election campaigning, that has a huge impact also, because the parties in Lebanon, they just suddenly give you this awesome solution for having electricity for this many months and for this many hours, and then people would actually vote for those politicians to reach the parliament or to be in the municipality. And I think that it's more of the political, that we also need the political awareness, because that is a huge part of this issue. Exactly.
What we're talking about now is clientelism, and it's one of the main tools that our politicians use in Lebanon in order to reach seats. But like Zanna was talking, you discuss whether we should go to nuclear energy or like green energy. And in Lebanon, we still discuss laws on illegal hunting, for instance. Like, see the difference in calibers and see where we are and see where you are. And it's what you said is very obvious, that you have the technology, you have the resources, and you already have green energy in Belgium. You have hydro based on air. I've seen them. But you said it, mainly there are sharks that needs to be fed. And these sharks are mostly related to politicians. And that's how they are being fed. But decentralization is very important. It's important for each area to see what it can provide and work under a circularity. And but this is not profitable. You won't be making billions and billions out of it. You just be making a good living. Really, if you see the conditions people are living under, you're like, how is that possible? And then you go back and see, okay, who owns this? Oh, there you go. They are politically affiliated. They are big businessmen owning, like, not only they work in energy, but they also work in real estate. They start working in services, hospitality. They start having everything. And this is how you feed the beast. They don't want us to only be using renewable energies because it's not profitable for them.
Zanna, is it similar for you in the sense that usually when the corporations and the politicians are working together, usually is shedding light on this enough to be able to stop a campaign, or does it take any, or do you take other measures to be able to stop it?
I think the intricate links between kind of corporate interests and the political world very much exist in Belgium and in the whole of Europe. And we know that, for example, recently at the latest COP, like the biggest delegation was that of the fossil fuel industry. They had more than 500 participants / lobbyists, so that's huge. And it's much easier to get a meeting as a lobbyist for a company than as an NGO with politicians. So I think the corruption, I would hope that we have less corruption in Belgium, but it's also more subtle. But then the subtlety of it is also makes it also harder to explain to the public. You can't just go out and say, you know, Total and the government, you know, they have this nice little joint project, and this is what they're doing. They're sleeping together, and this is what they have come up with, this disastrous, nasty plan. You need that kind of narrative doesn't click so easily with people, and thank God, because we live in a, you know, we are supposed to live in a democracy that works fairly well, that protects the interests of all. So in that sense, we have less of that. So that kind of narrative of we need a system change is, I'd say, a bit harder to sell in my country, from what I understand, compared to the story about the dam, for example. But what we do, and this is where we have, and I'd like to hear also more about that, how it works in your countries, we definitely legally challenge, we definitely go after the government. So recently, Greenpeace Belgium won a really big case against one of our governments. Belgium is a very complicated country, we have multiple governments. So recently in Belgium, Greenpeace had a major victory in that we won the final appeal against the Flemish government, and we took them to court because they have been consistently failing air quality standards, European air quality standards. So we took them to court and we said, look, if you don't come up with a plan, we're suing your ass. So we did. And then the plan that they provided was terrible. So we took them to court again and we're like, this plan is terrible. And what happened is that they ended up having to pay a certain amount of money, a kind of like a fine for each day that they didn't submit the plan. And that fine is now worth 750,000 euros. So, and we have gotten the final step of the court case. We were in the right according to the judge. So now the Flemish government owes us 750,000 euros, Greenpeace. And we are going to invest this in a fund for clean air, and people can, any kind of citizen or group or movement can apply and get funding basically for their project. But this is to show that we can take our governments to courts. And not only have we done this, we have seen this with the Shell case. We have seen this with the big legal case in the Netherlands against the government. So I think this kind of litigation is definitely setting a precedent. And that is one of our major, as Greenpeace, one of our major tactics. And this is where we can show that the government is not protecting our interests, and it's not just Greenpeace saying this, activists, these rebels that get on boats and block whatever harbors. No, it's, the judge, it's, the third power in our democratic system, the people that are supposed to say, to define right from wrong. And I think this is a really, really important strategic tool to use. But what we are seeing, and I was wondering if that's also happening in your countries, is that we are seeing when our politicians react to this, they're not saying, oh, mea culpa, yes, we should have had a plan by now, or, sorry, no, they're like, oh, these activist lawyers and these activist judges, and also, why are you taking us to court? Now we have to pay Greenpeace 750,000 euros. Can you imagine what it costs the Belgian state to have such a process? So it's really interesting how, in a sense, the power that is, and the institutes that is, jurisdiction and legal tactics and litigation is almost being used by certain politicians and being used as a narrative against what we're trying to change. So it's such a, and I was wondering if you see something similar with the dam being also legally challenged.
It's not funny, but it's like the difference on you saying like we're taking the government to court, and this is like a dream for us. We can't even do that. It's not a dream, it's something we are working on, but it's something until today we can't do it. Like the way we stopped the dam was an international campaign against this dam. Like people all around the world gathered and made this dam to stop. But it's not like we also like gave scientific proof that this dam will be built on tectonic plates, it will create seismic and so on, but they don't even care about that. They just care about feeding their pockets. Zanna was talking about holding the government accountable for air pollution. Okay, so Zanna, we have a city in Lebanon. It's called Junia. It's the top 5 most polluted cities in the Middle East. Top 5, and it probably contains 100,000 citizens. And you know why it's polluted? It's because of electricity factory, basically.
Cancer rates have skyrocketed in that area, and there have been several people who filed legal complaints.
Yeah, absolutely.
And usually when you pass beside it, you see clouds of black smoke coming out of them. So at some point when people filed legal complaints, they said that they got filters. But to get these filters to last longer, they put them during the day and then they remove them at night. So when you pass by at night, you see one huge cloud of smoke, but during the day it fades away a bit because there's the filter there. And I swear, cancer rates have skyrocketed in that area in a way that now people living near these factories, or whatever they're called, people, when they're living there, they know they're at risk. And whoever has been having cases of cancer now knows that it's specifically because of that. In a country with no accountability.
Yeah, so you can't even hold accountable ministers or deputies that run for these areas and that are inside the parliament now, or the Minister of Environment. You can't even hold them accountable for that. And this is crazy.
We have an issue with accountability. How do we have a road to follow, maybe, or is it not clear, to kind of force the accountability to become something that is adopted by the government, by the private sector?
By the way, like us as Lebanon, we can address this problem of air pollution in compliance with like international rules and regulation, and we also have signed on some, but like there's no follow-up. There's no one that is actually looking over that. There's no one that's actually taking care of this. There's no even air indicator. Like you wake up every day, you don't know what's the type of pollution or what's your type of air. So
how would you suggest like we move on from what we have now, which is almost no accountability?
If you have rules in place, right, then you can keep someone accountable, and if they don't comply with the rules, then you can call them out for it, and then you can potentially take them to court, or you can maybe cause media to look at this and make a story out of it, right? But if you don't have the systems in place, if you can't take your government to court, then obviously you're playing on a whole other level. Now, what I think when it comes to accountability, so there's like, systems to keep people, organizations, decision makers, whomever accountable. But then there is also, I think, political accountability. And I think this is where what I see, at least in Belgium, is failing is that even if you can point out and say, here's where a decision maker clearly made a mistake, and here's why they should basically step down from their mandate because they've just made a really big mistake. I have the impression that politicians are less and less likely to do so. They are less and less likely to say, well, yeah, that was my mistake, or my bad, or okay, it makes sense that I now step down from my political function. And this is happening less and less. I remember when I was younger, we would regularly see ministers being fired or stepping down over really big mistakes. Now they cry on television, or they don't cry on television. They're just like, well, this happened. I said this so many years ago, and whatever. And so in terms of political accountability, I really have the impression that politicians just get away with more. So that's and that is obviously not a good evolution. But in terms of how you change that, I think it's just like, I guess, what is wrong and what is right, where it used to be maybe clearer. Now there's this really big gray zone where everybody debates, how wrong or how right they were. And it's like much more difficult to say, this is the crux. This is what you did wrong. This is what you should have done instead. Because everybody has such different opinions on the matter. Like, this is why, this is where people call in alternative facts. Well, I mean, if you look at it from this side, however, then so that's that changes the debate. And I have the impression, but I'm not I didn't study politics. This is just really from just watching politics and watching the society evolve, is that is changing, that politicians don't do this as much, and especially not politicians from the extreme right-wing parties.
After working like in the waste management field, I noticed something like, if you want to go into that, you're not only working for just to take the trash and put it somewhere else, but it's like building this culture of recycling, of where the waste is going, of reducing, of what you are actually consuming. And also the way forward when you're in a country like Lebanon, when you don't have accountability, when you can't go to court, is mostly to work with under a partnership with the public sector, the private sector, and the public opinion, as the civil society or anyone who's from the area the project will be held in. And this way you give like ownership to the people, and you also raise awareness on like environmental aspects and what are the benefits of that. So, and somehow you're like building a community that's not that doesn't need the government anymore, or doesn't need governmental institution to function. And in times of chaos, especially in Lebanon, there are a lot of opportunities. And in times of like literally there's no one holding anyone accountable, if you know that this thing will be right and good for the society, why not actually merge forces with the civil society, with the public sector, with the private sector, and just work on this project? And it has been a success, and I think it's the only way. Just put the major politics aside. What's the problem now? We have a trash crisis. How are we gonna solve it? Us alone? Okay, we are against these politics, but it's not going to lead anywhere if we just stay here and say no and oppose. We need to give solutions, and the solutions will only be done when they are implemented through like public and private and all sectors.
Do you ever face threats as activists? Have you, Samer, ever received a threat for your activism and the campaigns that you've been conducting?
Yes, not like we're gonna come and kill you, but no, stuff that are personal. They create stories, allegations, or they can even ruin your job or the project. They're putting sticks in your wheels. You know, it's not like, yeah, we know where you live, we're coming for you. They can do that, but you know, I still haven't poked the big bear yet.
Could you possibly ever face any challenges in conducting your work because of the
Of course.
threats that you were mentioning earlier? So you said sometimes if someone doesn't like you, they could make your job harder. And basically,
Absolutely.
your job, which really seeks to fill a gap that makes things easier, would anyone challenge that and make it harder?
Yeah, and now we're gonna go back and talk politics, because the main owners of the it's crazy. The owners of landfills and the owners of waste companies are mostly people that are affiliated politically. So yeah, if they see you succeed or if they see you opposing them, they will try to stop you somehow. And it's it's crazy. But then again, this partnership I was talking about just now is to somehow create this system or module that will actually work and solve the problem, and not come like, yeah, we are opposed, we oppose everything you do and everything you say, and we just don't want to work with you. We can't, like, we can't cancel each other, and we can't fight each other, because we're not, as a generation, we're not violent. We don't want to seek blood.
There's familiarities in terms of, you know, having governments that are not ambitious enough, they aren't kept accountable, that are too close to corporate interests, and therefore, you know, don't get out of the status quo. So in that sense, I think the bigger systemic problems are there. But then, of course, obviously, you know, I live in a very different country with most of the time a democracy that functions rather well, I would say. But in terms of solutions, yes, I think we already have more solutions and more access to the finance the solutions as well, right? Where maybe you don't have that as much. But I really liked what I wanted to pick up on is what you said about this new generation that is standing up. I mean, just the fact that they were on a podcast and it's the three of you and I'm sitting here, so having been invited, but that's really amazing. And as the nearest Targaryen said, you know, the change isn't going to come from those old folks, right? From those old boomers. It's going to have to come from people like yourself and from the generations that will follow. And one of the biggest game changers in Belgium and in Europe has definitely been these enormous protests, these enormous climate protests, these young people coming out on the streets, young people refusing to go to school on Fridays, following Greta's footsteps. But in Belgium, we had massive demonstrations by young people, 35,000 people skipping school. My brother was in school. He didn't really care about climate back then, and he was out on the streets. And this is, I think, to pick up on something you said, Samir, is if you don't have the systems in place, or if the systems to keep politicians and political decision-making accountable don't function very well, because don't forget, we might have the means to take our governments to court, but it takes so long. I mean, it's the big climate case where we took all of our big three main governments to court. That case took over 10 years, because for the first 5 years, the only thing that they fought about was in which language this court case was supposed to be handled in, Dutch.
But you can still do it.
Yeah, of course. So exactly. So if you have that, no, of course, I'm not going to complain that we have these systems in place, and I sympathize with the lack of system. But what you said, Samir, the point about public opinion. So politicians, I think, are way more afraid of not being called out by a judge and having to be paid, like 750,000 euros. They don't care. Well, it comes out of a budget, whatever. But it's public opinion. And this is, I think, where really successful campaigning, that's where you need to be able to get, is to be able for people to say, these are the bad guys, these are the people responsible for whatever disaster, whatever the problem is, and then have that a critical mass of people face them and say, well, we are keeping you accountable, and we will do that by voting. We will do that by calling you out. And I think politicians have become even more susceptible to that.
Yeah.
And I think that the big protests with all those young people, a lot of them not even eligible to vote yet, have shown that this is where really, you had this political decision making, literally looking out of their windows and looking at these hordes and hordes of people passing by and saying, wow, these are 17-year-olds that are apparently, are smart enough to organize themselves. We have to at least have a debate, have an ongoing conversation. We can't just shut them down and dismiss them, although that's something that obviously they did, is dismiss them, call them out as, why don't you just go to university and study to be an engineer? That will help climate change way more than being out on the streets, these kind of arguments. So no, public opinion, the judge that is public opinion is such a powerful tool if you don't have, for example, litigation as a tactic in your toolbox. I live in a country where, activism and protesting your government, all of these things are very much allowed, right? And are definitely sometimes even, I think I take them for granted. But we know that, every day almost an environmental activist somewhere in the world gets killed because of their activism, because they go out and defend the land, because they go out and, stand up for environmental injustice and social injustice. And that's really, really insane. And I remember that when I went to the COP that we were talking about in Katowice, that I got taken off the train. I was on my way from Austria to Poland by train, and I got taken off the train by the border police because I was, which I found out later, because of posing a threat to national security as an activist. And I was an official participant to the COP. I was part of the NGO delegation. I was working for the biggest NGO participating in the COP. And so I remember then thinking, I have a network. My boss immediately called a couple of people, after 6 hours sitting in a police station, and being actually driven back to the train because they were going to put me back out on a train to Austria in the middle of the night. They got a call. I still don't know how that happened. Say, oh no, you're allowed. It's okay. You can stay in Poland. But there were so many people from other countries that also got arrested, and they didn't make it back to the COP. They were literally kicked out of the country. And I think this is also where the privilege of me being, of course, working for a big NGO, coming from, a country like Belgium, etc., gives me enormous privilege and over other people. And this is something we shouldn't forget, that it's much easier to be an activist, I guess, in my country than it potentially can imagine to be an activist in your country.
And being an activist in our country has become more threatening by the day, because there are challenges that are faced nowadays that we did not have to worry about a few years ago. For instance, now it is very common for someone to be arrested over a tweet.
Jeez.
And the arrest can last a standard duration of 4 days, 2 extendable to another 2 before you are allowed to be released. That's if you actually have a lawyer or you have people following up on the outside. Otherwise, it can be longer, because there's a trick that they usually play. They would arrest you on a Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday are non-working days, and then they count as of Monday again, and there you go, you have been arrested for a full week.
So basically using proper oppression by the police and this whole governmental force.
Yeah,
is what you're
there's
saying.
an activist whose passport was taken away from him upon arrival back in Lebanon a few weeks ago, just because he made fun of the president, I think. I'm not sure about that one. Is that it? But he's a comedian. This is what he does on social media. He makes fun of the struggles that are usually faced by Lebanese people. And so he arrived in Lebanon and his passport was taken away from him.
Yeah, this is what happens like in such societies. We're very oppressed. The environment is something that most of the people don't care about.
It gets worse than this. We've had instances in which people were kidnapped, they've had a bag on their head, and then they were arrested for what? So there are some violations that take place that are completely, you wouldn't imagine that they would still happen. And this was a guy who took off the picture of the president off a wall. And that's it. This was his actual violation. There were children below the age of 18 who were also arrested until activists launched campaigns to have them released. And so when these things happen, they really get you to question to what extent you are capable of expressing your opinion or to be protected under freedom of speech or freedom of expression.
Can I just as a comment, it just, to me, it's really striking how, you know, how you have, like, you're almost taking personal risks, right? You know, as you're not just
almost you are.
Yeah, you are taking personal risks,
especially if you're a prominent activist or like someone that's known in this field. They can really like shut you off, and they can even kill you, and no one will talk about you.
Does this scare you? Have you ever been, because I know Rio asked a question before, like, have you ever been threatened? But like, have you ever been scared?
Not really, no, because I don't know how to explain that, and I don't know, like, I don't feel I'm gonna die being shot from that. But it's not easy. It's not easy because the way they oppress other activists, and they can really just kidnap you, and literally no one will ever talk about you. And if they kill you or shoot you, some artists will draw your face, people will write your names for 2-3 days, and that's it. You know, the problem is still there. Probably our generation is not the one that will see the massive change, but at least we've been there. We started the change somehow. I don't know. I don't know. But no, I'm not afraid. I'm not like scared. If I were to die fighting an environmental cause, then let it be. But I hope it will actually create an impact and change something.
Unfortunately, no revolution, I think, and you know this better than I do because I've never lived through a revolution, at least not a political revolution in my own country, but no political revolution happens without people somehow ending up, unfortunately, you know, injured or literally putting their body on the line. And while I think you live obviously in a super oppressive regime, well, I think in every type of country, even in supposedly well-functioning democracies like ours, we can see that environmental activists are being threatened. We can see that there's outrageous police violence against activists when we hold demonstrations, when we do actions, and that the police doesn't differentiate between the peaceful protesters and, you know, the rookies that climb on top of walls and try to, you know, get onto private property, like, you know, myself. And this is where, and we know that these kind of protest movements are more and more being considered as threats to national security. And whether that is on paper, you know, in this kind of FBI-ish type of investigations, or whether it's, you know, a policeman sitting there and thinking, oh, this environmental activist, you know, we need to start watching him or her. It's the same. And I think this speaks to the power that is environmental activism and the power that is behind all of this. And as Samir said, you know, it's not an environmental activist and they're, you know, these 10 rookies that go and do non-violent direct action. It's all the people behind them that support the cause. And that's what governments are afraid of. And governments are afraid of people taking power into their own hands, becoming autonomous, becoming self-sustaining. And that is a testament to how powerful these movements are and can be. And that's, I think, if we can draw a positive note from this story, then it's that we, when we do rejoin, when we do come together, when we come up with a great campaign, is that we can challenge the powers that are and build a generation of people that will step into those power positions and hopefully to do things differently. And I can't wait to see what comes of people like you, you know, in years. I'm like, oh, wait, I saw, you know, a note on the news saying, you know, a new president or Lebanon, or, you know, new Minister of Environment, Samir. I was like, oh my God, I was on a podcast with that person 10 years ago. My children will be like, what's a podcast?
Do you think we can draw a connection between the local and the international community for further support?
First of all, like part of it comes from just any, you know, this is very inspiring, right? And I will carry this conversation into my work and into my personal life, and that in itself is already a change or a change maker, I'd say. I definitely think that if you ever feel like here's a really important story to share, that's kind of content that you know, people like use your international networks to spread the word. Because if you want to shine, as you said, you know, maybe your politicians might not necessarily listen to your politicians might also be susceptible to international pressure. So if you have an international news outlet reporting on something, you know, then maybe that's helpful, and maybe you have people in your network that could help you with that. I'm not saying that I can, but I can imagine that it's something. And yeah.
May I add something here? Because I think we're like breaking international laws when it comes to the environment. So yeah, if these people can be held accountable with international courts, maybe yeah, we can do that. But otherwise, it's not as easy.
No, of course, yeah. I mean, using of course legislation or legal action is one thing, but just shining a light not only on the things that go wrong, but also telling the stories of, you know, a community in Lebanon is, I don't know, self-sufficient, or, you know, somehow has ended up, the story of this dam being stopped, it's just such an inspirational story. All the circumstances, all the challenges you face, and you still manage to do this. You know, I think that those are the type of stories, at least with Greenpeace, that we now and then try to share as well, because it shows, you know, that we're not living in just like a tiny little enclave that is Belgium, but as Greenpeace, obviously, we're part of a bigger network and an international organization. So those international stories are also really interesting. And it's the story of people power, you know, it doesn't matter if it's Belgium or it's a story of, and if people in Lebanon with so few, much less resources than us can do these kind of things, can pull it off, then what the fuck are we waiting for, you know? I think that's kind of like the lesson learned here.
What would your message be for the youth of Lebanon regarding environmental activism or any kind of other activism?
Maybe if we actually go back to nature, we will be solving a lot of problems that are also personal. You will find like peace, you will find therapy in nature, and you will also find a lot of solutions to a lot of problems we're facing today, whether there are diseases like health diseases or like energy and water problems. It's not that I have a specific message, but it's just like I hope, like I wish people would consider each other even more. They will consider their environment more. They will consider every living creature more. And if we do so, I think we will manage to have a better living conditions.
So you already shared the story where your brother was in school and he was not interested interested in the climate and the environment, and you shared how young people are almost shut down when they're demanding for their own rights, for having a future, if you'd like. So what is your message for the Lebanese people within and outside of Lebanon?
Well, first of all, I think it's just clearly you're already doing a lot, right? Following in the footsteps of Samir and I can imagine a bunch of other great activists like the hosts of this podcast. It's maybe the one message, and maybe that's like the one universal message that I can think of is there is power in all of us, and then all of us bringing that power together is a really big force. And it sounds super cliche, like quoting from Star Wars or something, but it's I think, you know, like listening to what you have been saying, listening to the story, like I wasn't hopeful throughout this conversation, you know, hearing what you're faced with in terms of political incompetency and political corruptness and political just, you know, shit leadership. That doesn't make me hopeful that, you know, from one day to the other you can change this, but because maybe the circumstances aren't facilitating change, but then the change has to come from the people. And then the story about the dam is so hopeful in that, yes, you know, clearly change and hope, change is possible. And so, yeah, just keep doing what you're doing. I mean, you're clearly doing something right. And thank you so much for hosting and having these kind of conversations. It's really inspiring for me.
Thank you for being with us. I've absolutely loved this conversation. I don't want to wrap it up. All right, but I think it's time to thank you for being with us. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for bringing your experiences and your knowledge and your enthusiasm the way that you did to this conversation. I'm sorry again for all the postponement until it actually happened. And Zanna, I hope that you feel better, that it's not Corona. And thank you for doing this despite being sick.
No, it's okay. I feel good enough now. I feel better.
You're
now,
energized.
I know, I'm so energized.
Activism.
Exactly, right? Exactly. No, maybe I will go climb actually still tonight. So with my brother. So maybe, and then I will probably completely crash in my bed and dream of a dam in Lebanon or something. Yeah.
Well, thank you both, and it was awesome meeting you, both of you. So have a beautiful night.
Yeah, thank you so much
for having us.